he has the biggest torso to arm ratio in MMA. He is all neck and torso.
It's the ape index. It's
yeah.
like 0.1.
Whatever part of the clay that God used to sculpt his torso, like 50% of that was supposed to go to his arms, and he just fucked that up.
Thai boxing. Thai boxing. Come see the Thais, watch how they fight with just everything. Their hands and feet and bows and knees. This is an art of boxing you would all love to learn. Ooh-ah.
Hi guys, welcome to the Eight Limbs Podcast. I'm your host Ryan Wagner, and I'm here with my good friend and colleague Suram Muraladaran. I did not pronounce that right, but whatever, let's just go with it.
Nailed it in my opinion.
Close enough. So I've been out for like a couple months, and since I haven't done this podcast, Muay Thai has started up again. It was closed due to the pandemic. They've reopened Rajadamnern stadiums, and they're having a lot of shows at the smaller stadiums like Thanakorn and Omnoy. I think Lumpini's still closed right now. So we'll talk a little bit about that later. But I brought Shuram on to talk about the UFC fight and Fight of the Year contender that recently happened in ACA, which we'll get to in a bit. And he's going to go over some of the recent K1 fights with me as well. So let's start with Israel Adesanya and Paulo Costa. What were your overall impressions of the fight? What did you think of the way Costa approached Adesanya, Suram?
I mean, it was kind of self-explanatorily bad, I think. So a lot of the reason that anyone picked Costa, including myself, I'm not gonna pretend that I picked Izzy, even though it looks super obvious in retrospect. A lot of the reason that I picked Costa was that he was kind of too dumb to fail in that sort of really embarrassing way. Because Costa's thing is just he does his thing, and that's kind of what you can generally trust Paulo Costa to do, even faced with someone like Yoel Romero. But here he kind of did something completely different after like 2 kicks caught, which that was not good. I think he watched the Yoel Romero fight and just kind of completely misinterpreted it. And honestly, Costa doing tape is kind of the worst thing you can do if you're Paulo Costa, because like the less information you give him, the better. It's just he pretended that he was a thinker in this fight, and he's just not. He's not a problem solver. He thought he was Aristotle when he was actually just a machine, and that would have done better for him. But brilliant performance from Adesanya. He's growing more and more comfortable in the pocket with each fight. I don't see anyone in middleweight who's going to give him too much trouble. I mean, as much as I love Robert Whittaker, he looks like a more and more awful matchup for Whittaker every time I see him. Tough to say.
Yeah, I definitely see what you're saying about in regards to Paulo Costa being like, you would want him not to think. You want him to go out there and be Paulo Costa strategically, but with a couple tactical ideas to take to Izzy. But of all the stuff he did in that fight, being Paulo Costa was not really one of them. I know a lot of people have said that the stuff Izzy was doing prevented him from pressuring, and it did to some extent, but he didn't really seem intent on making that happen. And I understand why he would fight that way strategically. If he didn't think he could keep up a pressure game plan, consistent pressure, swarming for 5 rounds. But I think he really dropped the ball tactically. The big thing for me is that if you're going to fight against type like that and you're going to consent to an outside fight, you need to not only be able to compete with them somehow in their range, but you need a way to force the fight into situations or exchanges that favor you. And I don't think Costa came prepared to deal with what Izzy was doing, and I don't think he really knew what that kind of fight would look like. He didn't really have any tactical ideas on how to make that kind of game work. He tried to do the body kicks, to hurt him into the body kicks along the cage and cut him off with those, but he just kind of threw them. He did his usual thing without putting Izzy in the situations that those body kicks usually work. He wasn't pushing him to the cage, forcing him to move off, and then catching him with a body kick as he circled off. He was just kind of throwing them from range. And we really saw the difference between somebody who's a very willing kicker and fine at it for MMA, and somebody who's a genuinely elite kicker. When Izzy kicked Costa, not only was his form super efficient and fast, really hard for Costa to read and defend in time, but he had setups. He would feint into them. He would use footwork to set them up, and he would move out off them. Like, he would land a leg kick and then frame with his arms, sidestep diagonally so Costa couldn't return. When Costa did it, he didn't really set them up well, and his form was pretty inefficient. He'd take a massive step with his lead leg and then lumber his rear leg around like he's swinging a tree trunk, and Izzy could read it every time. Whenever Costa tried to kick the open side, Izzy would have time to see it coming and respond, and he would just angle his body so his his shoulder on the side the kick was coming from was in front, so the kick kind of ran up his back instead of colliding with the soft underbelly, and he was able to catch and counter. Although I will say, when I rewatched the fight, Costa's kicks were actually a little bit more effective than I'd thought at first. Izzy was catching and countering them, but Costa was still getting the better of the exchanges in which he landed a body kick. He would actually land a solid thudding body kick to the closed side, and then Izzy would throw a counter with a punch to the body, but it wasn't as strong as the kick. But I thought he, instead of just trying to do the kicks and then kind of getting dissuaded when they were countered, I would have really liked to see him start punching off the kicks. I made this comparison on Twitter, but I brought up Sangmanee and Tawanchai, their second fight. In the first fight, Sangmanee went out. Tawanchai is a super slick outside kicker, and he was kicking Sangmanee up. He was catching and countering all of Sangmanee's kicks, and I think he knocked him down with a head kick off a caught kick from Sangmanee. In the second fight, instead of just trying to kick with him, Sangmanee would throw the kicks and immediately step in with the right hand as soon as his foot planted down. So when Tawanchai was trying to catch the kicks, instead of being able to catch and counter, he would drop his hand to catch and then immediately get pelted with the right hand. And then the more that happened, the more he stopped trying to catch the kicks, and the more Sangmanee's kicks were working. So he had the dual threat of the kicks and punches working together, and Costa didn't really have any ideas to make those work. I'm not too sure how he intended to close distance. I don't know if he usually jabs quite a bit, and Izzy really shut that down with his hand fighting. So Izzy was right from the start employing foot and hand feints constantly to keep Costa at range and gather information on his reactions. And Costa's reactions were mostly either giving ground in response to the feints or trying to parry them, both of which left him open to the leg kicks. So once Izzy realized that Costa wasn't going to keep coming forward off his feints, he started putting leg kicks behind them. And those leg kicks took a toll really quick. They were really hard and fast, and as they were set up by his feints and footwork, Costa couldn't see them coming and mostly just ate them clean. Part of I think why Costa felt the need to give ground in response to the feints was because he doesn't have too great of defense on the inside. So if he's in super close range, he has maybe one layer of defense before he has to start giving ground or he's going to get hit. Though I am kind of confused about why he was so willing to concede ground when Izzy hadn't really established the threat of his punches at all. It didn't seem like Izzy needed to actually hit Costa to get Costa really fearing his punches. So even when he was just flashing that jab in his face, even when the jab hadn't actually landed, Costa was still super hesitant to come forward. Again, I don't know whether the game plan was to stay at range for a little bit and try to feel Izzy out, but like I said, I don't think he had the tactical astuteness to make that kind of game work. But I was really impressed with the way Izzy fought. Not only the feints, but his footwork looked great. He was constantly moving laterally, L-stepping and sidestepping around, occasionally going into a square stance and changing direction. And he'd use those direction changes to bait out Costa's kicks. He'd hop into a square stance and then pretend to move left to get Costa kicking and then slide out the right side. He shut down Costa's jab with his rear hand. He kept his rear hand extended for most of the fight to feel Costa's lead, and that allowed him not to react so heavily to Costa's feints like Costa was to his, because he was standing mostly at kicking range, and if Costa tried to jab in, he would immediately feel that jab on his palm, so he could just keep his eyes open for the kicks and the rear hand, which, as they were at long distance, he had a lot of time to see those, so he kind of took away the threat of Costa's lead hand. We saw Costa a couple times try to jab in from the outside. He wasn't really able to get anything done from from like just outside the pocket because Izzy was constantly controlling that hand, and Izzy would just back away and create distance, and Costa couldn't really do much. Whenever Costa took an angle to his lead side, Adesanya would control the lead hand and then switch into southpaw and kind of strafe out diagonally. So when Costa was trying to get around that hand fighting and try to take an angle to set up his rear hander kicks, Izzy would just slide out. There was a cool thing he did too at one point where he went into a square stance and controlled his hand and then kind of feinted a sidestep laterally to get Costa, it was a body kick, to get Costa kicking at his body. And then he did it again, juked to the other side and tried to sidestep back. Costa went to kick where he thought Izzy would be, but instead of going to the side like he did before, Izzy just slid back diagonally. So there was a lot of cool footwork stuff like that. There were some cool setups for Adesanya's kicks. He was putting them behind side steps and L steps, so he'd circle around, get Costa turning into him, and kick when he planted his foot. There was one time where he used an oblique kick to force Costa to withdraw his leg, and then as soon as he stepped forward again and planted the leg back, he pelted it with a really hard leg kick. And then after just picking apart Costa for like 7 minutes, eventually he kicked his leg to bits, and Costa was having trouble moving at that point, and he was really hesitant reacting to the feints. Then he got a little bit desperate and started entering with bigger punches, and Izzy just nailed him with a counter, an overhand that kind of landed on his shoulder and knocked him off balance, and then caught him with a left hook behind the ear and just killed him. So yeah, I agree that I'm not really sure what we were seeing from Costa there. I don't know what his game plan was, but I think that him and his team dropped the ball by not only by getting him to fight against type, but not really preparing him to fight that kind of fight. And I think there was some, like, Costa was not prepared at all to deal with a kicker like Izzy, because I think most MMA guys, unless you train with elite kickboxers or Knockmoys, you're not going to feel that kind of kicking efficiency and power at all. Like Costa was, I think he expected to be more competitive on the outside at kicking range, but Izzy's kicking form was so much faster, so much more efficient, and with his setups, Costa just really had nothing for him there.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think the trouble that I have with not just the tactics of Costa, which were non-existent, but the general strategic way that the fight went was that I think everyone before the fight pretty much figured that Costa's game was going to be a short one. Like his game all the time is, especially given the Romero fight, was walk forward, go super, super hard for 2 rounds, hope the guy isn't super durable like Yo Romero, and then maybe fade late. Like, he wasn't ever going to compete in a volume, slow-paced kickboxing match with Israel Adesanya. And I think we all saw that with, like, for example, how the Yo Romero fight went in round 3 when he was, like, picked apart with jabs. Even, like, some spots in the Hendricks fights where, like, Hendricks, he didn't really need a ton of setups to, like, kick his leg. He could, like, walk forward with a double left hand and then kick his leg on the way out. Like, there was a distinct lack of craft in what Costa did after whatever it is that his A game was. So I think what people expected, and myself included, was that he would be too dumb to change his approach for Israel Adesanya. He would be like, oh, Israel Adesanya, like, even before the fight, you're like, oh, he's skinny, fine, treat him like he's skinny, but just do your thing. And he treated him like a ridiculous power puncher who he didn't want to get near, while treating Yo Romero as the skinny one. So, not particularly, because I really do think, I think Costa looked at the Yo Romero fight, went, I beat Yo Romero, I'm better at Yo Romeroing than Yo Romero at everything. And he didn't see Yo Romero's, incredible kicking defense in general. Like, Yo Romero's, for an MMA fighter, Yo Romero's very hard to kick.
Also,
like,
he just made a fucking steal. Like, you can kick his leg. Good job. You just broke your own shin.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was Rockhold, like, hurt his shin on the second kick. It was crazy. It might have even been a clean kick, or it might have been checked. Either way, that's dumb. But Yo Romero, he's pretty hard to kick. He's incredibly composed. So he wasn't going to react to the feints the way Costa did, with, like, reaching out, parrying, giving ground. Yo Romero, he just stood there. When he wanted to stand there, he would stand there. And the counterpunching, because Izzy just couldn't, he can draw stuff out and go in. He could draw stuff out and draw stuff out more, because Yo would just hit him when he went in a lot of the time. And Costa didn't have those tools. He just had the incredible physicality and, like, the general, oh, I'm bricked up, I can hit this guy sort of thing. It's just that his method of hitting people was very different, and he went away from that very, very quickly. I agree with everything that you said. I think Adesanya is going to be very, very difficult for the rest of the division to handle. Costa I said before the fight, Costa is like an archetypically tough fight for Izzy in that, he's a pressuring body hitter, where Izzy is someone who likes to lean a lot and move around a lot. And aside from that big, archetype versus archetype sort of fight, it could fall apart on any granular level, and it really fell apart on every single granular level that you could possibly find. So after that, the next potential contender is Jared Cannonier. Cannonier shouldn't beat Robert Whittaker, but he might, because Whittaker has his own set of issues.
He has the power of the deep state behind him.
Quannonier. That's a good joke in text. That's not a good joke when you say it.
Yeah, it doesn't work over voice.
Dear Lord. Okay, but that's what I get for stealing a joke. But yeah, I mean, Cannonier, if he wins, he's like a dangerous fight for Izzy, but not necessarily like one where I'm going to be like, Cannonier has a systematic way to win this fight, because he really doesn't. As for Costa, I mean, he's probably going to fight like Derek Brunson now, which is going to be, that's a fight they should make, actually. But, I think Robert Whittaker would beat him. Cannonier might actually kick his leg for free more than I thought he would, and punch him when he comes in. Like, there are some real holes in what Paulo Costa does, and I think it's been covered up by a lot of guys kind of letting him do what he wants. And now that someone hasn't, I think people might just show a little bit more resistance.
I think Cannonier versus Costa would be a really cool fight. I'd like to see that. In response to the crowd that says Costa that it wasn't that Costa fought the wrong fight, but that Izzy wasn't letting him getting going. I think that there's like a lot of people get the impression that if somebody is a better striker, like a more technical, skilled striker, there's like you hear there's levels to this shit narrative a lot, and sure, you can have somebody who's a lot better at striking than another person outclass the other guy just on a pure basis of skill. But even if you're less skilled than the guy you're fighting, being sharp in the right ways can close a gap of like a big gap in technical skills. And I don't think Costa was sharp in the right ways in this fight. He tried to, like we said, to stay on the outside, and he didn't really have a sense of how his tactics were going to play into that kind of game. I think I would have liked to see him try to enter off body shots more, and use instead of just trying to kick his body from range or to close distance with his feet and kick. I would have liked to see him throw kicks behind punching combinations. And I think people get the impression, some people, that he was super scared of Adesanya's counterpunching. I'm not sure if he was, but I don't think he should have been. Adesanya is a solid counterpuncher, but he's not the kind of guy that throws really great simultaneous counters. He's never really had a big threat of just killing people when they enter. If you look at the Whittaker fight, Whittaker kind of entered for free most of the time. His blitzes, he didn't get countered during the blitzes. He got countered when he tried to stay in the pocket after, when he was out of position, and extend those exchanges. I've never really thought Izzy is the greatest at simultaneous counters, hitting guys when they enter. It's usually in extended exchanges that he's better at countering. Like we saw at the end, he swayed to his left and then baited a jab out of Costa, slipped inside that, and then caught him with a counter. That's the kind of stuff that Izzy's great at. But I don't think he's not Conor McGregor. He's not going to slide back and murder you as soon as you close distance on him. So I think Costa not trying to come up with, not really having those tactics in place to close distance hurt him. I would have liked to see more like weaving into the pocket, entering off body shots, and more attempts to bait out the leg kicks and counter them. Although Izzy's hand fighting, preventing Costa from doing anything with his jab, really hurt him there. But yeah, I agree that during Costa's run to the title, he kind of got a string of weird matchups. We didn't really get to see him against a great pocket boxer. So I do think there is avenues that somebody like Whittaker or Cannonier could take to beat him. I'd really like to see one of those fights next. But moving on.
The Fight Site has partnered with Bovada, the trusted source for gaming entertainment since 2011, for hundreds of thousands of players, to provide users with up to $250 bonus for signing up. To accept this tremendous offer, click the link in our Twitter bio or click on the banner on our homepage to start playing today. Please bet responsibly. Get your favorite shows and sporting events wherever you are with ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN allows users to change their IP address, protect their privacy, and avoid over-the-top streaming services, a necessity for all combat sports fans. To order, click the banner on our homepage and use the #1 trusted VPN today.
ACA, Absolute Championship Akhmat, our sponsors, Daddy Rov, recently had one of the fights of the year. Abdul-Aziz Abdulvakhabov fought Alexander Sarnavskiy. And Sarnavskiy's been around forever. I think he's only like 31, surprisingly. He was one of the Bellator's token Russians a few years back. But he's a veteran. He's a very solid striker. He's never been quite the elite of the elite outside on the regional circuit, mostly because his wrestling defense is kind of spotty. He's a decent takedown. He has decent takedown defense, but he kind of fails when guys are dedicated wrestlers and start chaining. But he put on an incredible performance against Abdulvakhabov, even if I don't think he had much of an argument for winning. So, sir, what are your initial impressions of this fight? Is it your fight of the year, or do you have a fight you like better than this?
I mean, I could go either way between this one and Max Holloway versus Volkanovski too. I think they're very different sorts of fights, obviously. Like because generally if you look at like fights of the year, there's like the regular favorites and there's like the hipster favorites. And Holloway Volkanovski, from what I've seen in the public, it's very much a hipster favorite because it wasn't like, it wasn't super violent, but it was incredibly deep. It was a very, very thoughtful fight where Abdulvakhabov versus Sarnavskiy was kind of a blend because you could see a lot of what Sarnavskiy was doing it was a very, very solid technical performance from him, but it ended up just incredibly violent by the end of the fight. So I think I could go either way on that. There were a bunch of great fights this year in the UFC, particularly in the month of June, but I think I'd lean Abdulvakhabov Sarnavskiy for now. There's still Gaethje Khabib to go, but as for the details of the fight, it was a really interesting sort of slickster versus smasher sort of matchup. Like I think it was the kind of fight that we wanted from Costa versus Adesanya. If Costa fought like the right fight and Adesanya was actually challenged a bit more, you have one guy who's going to be very, very committed to forward pressure, jabbing the guy backwards. And smashing against the fence, and you have another guy who looked very, very good in terms of ring craft and combination punching in the pocket, who would spin him around a lot. And I wrote an article on this fight, so go read it if you haven't. But it was
check
incredible.
out that article; it was fantastic.
Thank you. But yeah, so essentially the gist of the fight was that Abdulvakhabov is. So we saw in the Vartanian rematch that Abdulvakhabov is not necessarily the best ring cutter. He kind of has a lot of Calvin Kattar in him. Yeah. It's like he wants to jab people back and get them standing still or conceding to exchanges, but when a guy just doesn't want to do that, he's like, well, what do I do now?
He automatically pivots to the left off that leaping jab every time, and then is consistently surprised when they just kind of circle out.
Yeah, I mean, the way that he won this fight eventually was just like pure persistence. If you want to look at it that way, he kind of cormiated Sarnavskiy. But Sarnavskiy did a very, very good job for as long as he was in the fight. Lots of nice little pivoting left hooks to get off the fence, pivoting jabs to like lead him into uppercuts. We're talking about Adesanya. It was actually pretty reminiscent of the first Adesanya-Whittaker knockdown, where Adesanya would like pivot with the left hook, let Whittaker's rear hand just kind of like swing off in the opposite direction and crack him with the uppercut. Sarnavskiy did that a couple times on Abdulvakhabov, where he'd like pivot with the jab or pivot with the left hook, and like Abdulvakhabov would just be like, what the hell just happened? And sometimes he'd hit him in the body with that same thing. There was a lot of body work in the fight. It was a pretty great fight, and I think the thing that I liked the most about it was that Sarnavskiy actually accounted for the fact that he'd get tired later by just beating the crap out of Abdul-Aziz's body for like 2 whole rounds, and then it just didn't matter anyway. Like that's not something I generally love about a fight, but it was very, very funny to me as someone who likes Abdulvakhabov a lot. It was the kind of fight where I wouldn't necessarily say Abdulvakhabov came out of it looking better. There were a lot of the things were exactly the same, but Sarnavskiy came out looking very, very good.
Yeah, I was really impressed with Sarnavskiy's performance, especially with his takedown defense. I thought that he might give Abdulvakhabov a little bit of trouble on the feet, but he'd be quickly taken down and dispatched, and AAA couldn't really take him down at all. Although I was a little bit surprised he didn't commit to the wrestling as much as I expected. He kind of like he would try going for a single leg and then just kind of abandon it and go upper body when it didn't work instead of continuing to chain. But Sarnavskiy's grip fighting was pretty on point in that fight for the most part. So he had a really tough time taking him down. As for the body work, I was super impressed with that. You rarely see body work in general of that level in MMA, but especially counters to the body. Sarnavskiy started working a jab to the body early and employing consistent lateral movement to keep AAA from corralling him. And Abdulvakhabov isn't really a pressure fighter. Like, I think a lot of people think of him as this destroyer who's trying to come forward and pressure you. He does his best work when guys are coming into him. He usually closes distance behind a leaping jab and uses that to bait out counters. And then he'll proactively slip or duck off his jab, expecting guys to throw back at him and then counter that. So he's usually best. He's also a great counterpuncher himself, has an excellent cross counter that he finished Vartanian with. So his thing is usually he's best when guys come to him. He's great at countering an aggressive opponent, and he's good in willing pocket exchanges, but he's always had trouble tracking down elusive outfighters, especially because his arms are like, I'm trying to think of how to describe his body proportions, and I'm not sure what words to use. He has the biggest torso to arm ratio in MMA. He is all neck and torso.
It's the ape index. It's like 0.1.
Whatever part of the clay that God used to sculpt his torso, like 50% of that was supposed to go to his arms, and he just fucked that up. But yeah, he basically has to use the leaping jab to close distance because he has T-Rex arms. So he would do that leaping jab and then try to bait out a counter, and instead of giving him what he wanted and swinging at the head and then opening himself up to Abdulvakhabov's counters, Sarnavskiy would immediately counter to the body, and pretty much every entry he immediately threw that right hook or right uppercut to the body, and AAA didn't really know how to deal with it at all. He was expecting he would do the leaping jab and then duck off of it, thinking he's gonna duck Sarnavskiy's punch and then hit him back. But every time that body counter came, he would kind of freeze up, and then Sarnavskiy could get a couple more punches in and then pivot out. Sarnavskiy started using a right uppercut to the head to punish AAA's proactive slipping, which I really liked. As the fight went on, Abdulvakhabov increasingly pursued the clinch. He would shoot to back Tiger up to the fence. And then once he was in the clinch with him on the fence, Sarnavskiy didn't really have much answer to that. And as the fight went on, Sarnavskiy, it was weird. Even though he was pounding the body, Sarnavskiy was the one that slowed down late. I think part of that is because Abdulvakhabov is just a fucking tank. And part of it was because those body punches, while he was landing a lot clean and hard, a lot of them were kind of arm punchy. Like his elbow would come away from his ribs and he would like really have to force that in there. So I think those kind of took some out of him too. He was expending a lot of energy with the counter punching too. Like AAA would come in with a leaping jab, and then Sarnavskiy would have to throw a big combination to counter that and then pivot out in order to freeze Abdulvakhabov so he could get out. And he was doing more volume work, and he was throwing with a lot of power too. So he eventually got tired and wasn't able to keep up that the ring craft, the constant pivoting and direction changes. Abdulvakhabov also adjusted well. He adjusted his pressure, and instead of leaping in with the jab and immediately pivoting off to his left, he stopped leading with that leaping jab so much and would instead walk Sarnavskiy down more conservatively, force him to back up and eating up space with feints rather than making those big movements that could be countered and pivoted away from. And then as his movement slowed down, he would keep up the body counters, but instead of being able to throw that uppercut to the body, get off a couple punches to the head, and then pivot out right away, he would start standing in place more often after the body shots, and AAA would be able to counter back. The real turning point of the fight was at the end of the third round. Abdulvakhabov battered Sarnavskiy in the clinch a little bit and scored repeated clean elbows. There was like this moment where he kind of figured out that if he leaps in with a jab, he was going to get countered, but he could close distance more subtly and just elbow the shit out of his face. He landed like 3 or 4 stepping elbows in a row, and Tiger didn't know how to deal with that and kind of panicked, backed up to the cage, and then just got smashed. Then later in the fight, Abdulvakhabov used the clinch more and more. He would shoot in on the hips in order to back Sarnavskiy up to the cage, and then climb up to the upper body and go to work there. He also started baiting and ducking under the counter left hook that Tiger was using a lot to score reactive clinch entries, which was nice. Round 4 was Abdulvakhabov's best round, and he battered Sarnavskiy in the clinch for most of it. His clinch game is lovely. I love Abdulvakhabov's clinch game. He was using an underhook to control and switching between underhook on his right side, and his left hand would often switch between the collar tie or crossface on the opposite side when he wanted to land strikes, and he'd use that as a base to knee and elbow out of. He'd switch to a wrist control or an inside bicep frame to land elbows to. He did a lot of really great work in transition. He would use that double inside bicep frame with his hands on Sarnavskiy's biceps, controlling him. So if Sarnavskiy tried to swim under or grab his head, he could just follow it with his elbow and keep tracking to keep his arms out. And he'd use that as a base he'd dig his head in, control the biceps, hit him in the body repeatedly, land little uppercuts from there, and get off massive elbows. The elbows in this fight from Abdulvakhabov were lovely. The 5th round was pretty competitive. Tiger, he got beat up in the 4th round and then kind of saved his energy for a big comeback. Tiger did good work at range early, but Abdulvakhabov was able to overwhelm him a little bit more and get him to the cage. The clinch work in that round was more competitive, and Tiger kind of figured out how to get off some offense. But his offense was mostly little knees and he didn't really have his hips into them because his back was on the cage. Whereas Abdulvakhabov was landing clean, hard elbows. So it was a really close fight and a good performance from Tiger, but I don't think there's a great argument for him winning. I know a couple people scored that for Sarnavskiy.
Yeah, I mean, I could see Sarnavskiy getting the fight scored for him, but it would probably hinge more on round 1 than round 5, because round 1
I think there's a better argument for him winning round 1 than 5. Yeah.
Because I mean, round 1, it wasn't Abdulvakhabov landed the best shot at distance. Later in the round, it was a big clean right hand, and then he walked into the clinch and landed at least one big elbow off that wrist control. So I think he landed the better shots of the round. But I think you could make an argument that Sarnavskiy got 1, 2, 3 before kind of getting overwhelmed in 4 and 5. But I think it was a pretty solid 1, 4, 5 Abdulvakhabov card. I agree on his clinch. I think it's a really, really fun clinch because you could actually see Abdulvakhabov kind of baiting Sarnavskiy into really, really fearing the elbows at distance. Because a lot of what Abdulvakhabov did in the clinch was he'd wrist control, and then when Sarnavskiy would fight the grips, he would kind of grab both wrists and turn it into a high guard where he could just step in elbow basically in the pocket. And in round 4, there was this one moment where Sarnavskiy would throw a counter, and then Abdulvakhabov would just before he could pivot out, he'd just grab the wrist, and then Sarnavskiy would cover up hard and just stand in place because he was petrified of the elbow, and Abdulvakhabov just jabbed him back and smashed him with the right hand. He really picked up how the fight was going by round 4 and 5, but it was. I think you could say it was a concerning fight for Abdulvakhabov in terms of matchups at the top. Someone like Prime Eddie Alvarez would probably beat him up badly, but it was. I didn't really change my mind on the matchups in terms of the current lightweight scene. I think he'd still be a pretty bad matchup for someone like Nurmagomedov, who would probably try to walk into him and jab him and wouldn't be nearly as mobile as Sarnavskiy, and a bunch of guys at lightweight around the world who would really, really struggle with Abdulvakhabov's clinch game and probably even his takedowns, because Sarnavskiy was more diligent at fighting grips and keeping his balance than someone like Dustin Poirier would. And Abdulvakhabov's top game is really, really, really nasty. He got Ali Bagov to quit off a minute on top. So, I mean, making Ali Bagov quit isn't super impressive in retrospect. But he really beat Ali Bagov up from on top. So it was Abdulvakhabov didn't really get the best fight that he could in this fight, but he still won it, and I think that's something reasonably valuable.
Yeah, in regards to the wrestling, it did change my opinion on how we do against Poirier, because I thought he'd be able to hit takedowns to buy time on the feet against Poirier. After the Sarnavskiy fight, though, I've seen Sarnavskiy lose to wrestlers a lot, and some of them weren't the greatest wrestlers. He did do a decent job of grip fighting in this fight, but I still don't think his chain wrestling is there at all. So I think I do have some questions about Abdulvakhabov's offensive wrestling after this. It's possible that Sarnavskiy's improved that a lot, but this late into his career after consistently struggling with wrestlers, I'm not too sure about. With his back to his clinch game for a little bit, I really love how he's able to kind of control guys in unfavorable positions. Like a lot of people, a lot of clinch fighters will get guys to the cage, start trying to settle into the clinch, and then before they're able to really establish anything, the guy breaks off, and then they have to track him down again and go through all that work. And you can only have that happen like once or twice in a round, unless you can keep him on the cage for a long time. It's really hard to get guys back there, especially in short 5-minute rounds. But Abdulvakhabov is really great at keeping guys on the cage. He's super strong, and he uses not only like underhooks, collar ties, and stuff like that, but he'll even use disadvantageous positions really well to control guys. Like if somebody is sneaking around him with an underhook, he'll be able to like clamp a whizzer down and then just kind of square his hips up to them and walk them back into the cage. He redirects with collar ties really well, so it's super difficult to get off the cage when he's controlling you there. His work in transition was excellent too. He was using the takedowns to get Sarnavskiy thinking about grip fighting, then coming up to upper body positions. And because Sarnavskiy was still looking at the takedown, he would get inside position and be able to control him from there. And he mixed his positional clinch grappling with his striking really well. He would use that inside bicep frame to elbow off of, and he used Sarnavskiy's reactions to the strikes to improve his position. So like when Sarnavskiy would pummel in, he'd try to pummel in. He would control a wrist, elbow him, and then Sarnavskiy would like kind of shell up for a minute and cover his face, and he'd use that to get an underhook. I was super impressed with Abdulvakhabov's clinch game. I think this fight's probably the best showcase of just how good his clinch is. I would really love to see him in the UFC. I agree that the fight was a little bit concerning for him. He's getting up there in age, and I'm not sure how much he has left. I don't think he's necessarily past his prime at this point, but he's definitely getting there. I think he's been fighting for about 10 years, so I honestly wouldn't expect him, Bogov, or Vartanian, unfortunately, to be at the top of their games for too much longer. So it's really time to shit or get off the pot for the UFC, and of course, as we know, there's no hope for that ever happening, which makes me very sad.
Yeah, I mean, there's apparently some hope for Vartanian, but he's also apparently going to, if there's any hope, it's that they
put him
against
against
a
Khamzat
massive,
Chimaev.
A huge welterweight, middleweight, who's going to try to wrestle him as much as he can, which is, those are not fun times.
Khamzat will like throw him around by being a light heavyweight fighting a lightweight, and then Dana will be like, the kid just didn't want to fight. He can go back to Russia.
Yeah, that'll suck. And I mean, I kind of have no doubt that Vartanian will have like some cool moments, because as much as Khamzat has been bag-offing people, he is not Ali Bagov, but that would just be a gross fight.
It's a lot bigger than Ali Bagov.
I have no doubt that fight would be incredibly saddening for all four of us who care about Edward Vartanian.
Fortunately, Dana doesn't even know who Vartanian is and had never had any intention of signing him to fight Khamzat.
Yeah, I mean, that's fortunate for Khamzat. No, not really. I wanna believe in Vartanian. But anyway, yeah, I think Abdulvakhabov, I don't think he's ever going to leave ACA. Like, the time has passed, and I think he's too much of a Kadyrov loyalist, which is what I've heard. So yeah. That sucks. But hopefully some UFC fighters get cut for, like, unfavorable political opinions, and they end up in ACA. So then AAA can just, like, struggle with them for a bit and then just walk them down and cross-counter them to death. So, yeah, I mean, I think it was a very fun fight, even if it wasn't like super, super complex the way Max Volk was, where you could see like both guys making a ton of adjustments and like the micro level to each other. Mm-hmm. It was Sarnavskiy doing his thing for a lot, doing it incredibly well considering the circumstances, and Abdulvakhabov just being completely indestructible, completely undeterred by anything that Sarnavskiy did, and figuring the fight out.
Yeah, awesome fight. I'm so glad it happened. Probably one of my favorite fights this year. Either, if it's not my favorite, it's definitely right behind Max and Volkanovski. And since Leon Edwards isn't fighting this year, I doubt any fight will eclipse them. Yep. As we know, Leon Edwards, the most exciting fighter in MMA.
AAA versus Leon Edwards in the clinch, if they were at size parity, would be the shit.
God, MMA really has a lack of really good clinch striker versus clinch striker matchups. And usually when we do get a great clinch matchup, it's like a wrestler against a striker, which is a really interesting dynamic, and I like it. Like fights like Leon Edwards and Usman, or RDA against Covington are cool to watch, but it'd be really, really fun to see some elite clinch fighters in MMA go at it in the clinch. We don't get that too often.
I mean, even something like Prime RDA versus Abdul-Vakhabov would be really, really sick, like everywhere.
That would be an amazing fight.
Because you have the southpaw thing with RDA where you can't just cross counter him, and the body attack kind of, but you also have like a really competitive clinch and Abdul-Vakhabov kind of trying to wrestle him maybe.
RDA would go at him too, and they'd get in a lot of exchanges. Man,
Sick.
now you're making me sad that we're never going to see guys like Abdul-Vakhabov fight people anybody's heard of.
I mean, ACA has enough great people. No one's ever. I mean, do they? Artem Reznikov's the next contender. Let's hold off on that.
Yeah, we're not talking about the Ryzov fight, but Reznikov didn't win that.
Yeah, that was a bad one.
Hyperfly was founded on the idea to commit itself to the athlete, with the highest quality gear to serve that need, be it in jiu-jitsu or anything else. With a wide amount of gis, no-gi gear, and leisure wear, Hyperfly is the one-stop shop for every grappler's needs. To order, click on the banner on the Fight Site homepage, as it helps us continue to produce great content.
Moving on to K1. So I roped Shurem into discussing the K1 fights with me. He doesn't watch much kickboxing, so I'm gonna let him go first and laugh at him if he has bad opinions.
That's a good idea. I mean, there's a lot more chance of you building off what I say than the opposite. So let's see.
So the main event was Rukia Ampo against Hideaki Yamazaki. They fought once before a year or two ago, I think, and Ampo KO'd him with a head kick. That did not happen this time. Yamazaki just stormed him in round one. He didn't do too much for like a minute or two, and then just bounced in with a jab and a right hook behind the ear, knocked him down. Then as soon as Ampo got up, he got knocked the fuck out with a massive left hook. Not really too much to take from that fight.
Yeah, I mean, like, Yamazaki had some success jabbing in, like, twice. And then Ampo tried to, like, flying knee him on the counter as soon as he was knocked down, which was kind of I mean, I don't know if it was questionable because, like, he was kind of in Hail Mary mode at that point. But yeah, that left hook was nasty. It looked like he got sniped. So that was cool. I mean, good introduction to kickboxing, I suppose.
Yeah, that was the first fight you watched?
I mean, I watched some of Doumbé since Danny wrote the article on him. But K1, this is actually the first one.
You never got around to watching Grigorian lose 4 times to Sidichai before eventually beating him?
Oh, watch the clips. I was talking about full. I mean, I guess this was kind of a clip that was disguised as a full fight. But yeah, I mean, I guess the second fight I watched was the first full fight.
So that was the main event. That was for the 65 kilogram title. Yamazaki is now the champion after dispatching Ampo in like 2.5 seconds. Yuuki Egawa fought Tatsuya Tsubakihara. Yeah, Tatsuya Tsubakihara. I'm a big Egawa fan, so this fight made me sad. I wasn't too familiar with Tsubakihara coming into this fight, but he impressed me a lot. What were your impressions of the fight, Sram? I know you have a little bit of familiarity with Egawa because I wrote that article on him.
Yeah, I mean, that was pretty much all the familiarity I had with anyone on this card. Egawa, he looked really interesting to me in that article, and if I ever got around to watching kickboxing earlier, I would have probably enjoyed him a lot. You could see some of the stuff that you mentioned in the article with his like really impressive swarming combinations. There was a cool moment in, I think, near the end of round 1 where Tsubakihara got stuck on the ropes and he got hit with like a double left hook to the body and to the head, which was straight out of the Abdul-Vakhabov playbook, if I may plug him once more. But yeah, I mean, in general, it was a very disciplined performance from Tsubakihara. He kept the exchanges incredibly short. He linked, when there were exchanges, he linked the teep and the jab very well, and Egawa didn't really seem to have much of an answer to it. There was a point in round 3 where Tsubakihara would just feint the teep, and Egawa would have to stop because he didn't want to have his advance broken by a hard teep again. His ring craft looked very good. He did a nice job pivoting off when there were exchanges. In general, Egawa couldn't really get to the spots that he wants to be in, which are those uneven exchanges where guys are just covering up against the ropes. He needs an answer to the teep, and I don't know how good Tsubakihara is in context. I think he looked very good, but I don't have any context as to kickboxing. But he looked, if other guys can do that, then Egawa might be in trouble in terms of, struggling to close the distance on strong outfighters and guys who keep the. It's kind of like a stylistic barrier that I think Egawa can like overcome eventually. But I don't know how deep into his career he is or how much of a finished product he is. He has a good game, but this was kind of a struggle for him.
Yeah, I'm absolutely with all that. Fuck you, Saram. You were supposed to have bad opinions so I could mock them. But no, yeah, I totally agree. Egawa's a really interesting pressure fighter because he's not a Paulo Costa guy that's gonna, well, after the Izzy fight, maybe he is a Paulo Costa guy, but he's not the kind of fighter he's not a tank like Justin Gaethje or Paulo Costa. He's not gonna walk forward, tank all your offense, put you on the ropes and just batter you. He's a lot more patient. Hence, I named my article on him, The Patient Pressure of Yuuki Egawa. So there you go. But he backs guys up not by like putting huge combinations on them or threatening them with big power punches. He does a lot of lead leg harassment, like light little kicks with his lead leg to force guys to give up ground. He'll feint them back to the ropes and then occupy the space. But it's only once guys are on the ropes that he does his big power punching and swarming. And Tsubakihara frustrated that a lot with his ring craft and his outfighting. Tsubakihara's footwork and ring craft look excellent. He controlled most of the fight by his pivots, his lateral movement, and some nice counter punches when Egawa tried to close distance. He was constantly changing directions and using lateral movement to frustrate Egawa's attempts to corral him. And because Egawa doesn't do a lot of his work in open space and usually reserves his swarming for when guys are on the ropes, Tsubakihara would be able to land some shots at range, keep them off, and then Egawa would have to make up all that distance again, and he'd already be fighting from a deficit. So he wasn't really able to get to any of his positions that would ensure victory. Tsubakihara consistently broke the line of attack when Egawa entered, countering and pivoting his entries, and pivoting off back into the center. He landed some really nice short counter right hands when Egawa was swarming on him too. He would use the linear strikes really well to intercept Egawa before he got to the ropes, the teeps, jabs, and some really nice stepping knees. And yeah, I totally agree with what you said, that Egawa has an issue dealing with that, especially because he needs his man on the ropes before he can really go to work. And the jabs, knees, and teeps really frustrated his attempts to close distance and back Tsubakihara up. Egawa had some success with body-head combinations, but he was largely outmaneuvered and couldn't consistently force Tsubakihara into the positions that he needed to work those. So yeah, I was really sad because I love Egawa, but I was really impressed with Tsubakihara as well. Egawa's really young. I think he's been fighting for quite a while, but he's only like 22 years old. And he's only recently kind of emerged as a top fighter, so he definitely has a lot of time to patch up his weaknesses. He definitely needs a more consistent way to deal with those linear strikes, and I'd like to see him do more work at range. Usually his best work at range is counters when guys open up. He'll slowly and patiently work him back to the ropes, and if they lash out and try to hit him hard before he gets there, he'll slip and counter. But Tsubakihara wasn't committing to hard punches to the head. He was just using that light little jab to draw out counters and then avoid them. And then he'd do his big work with the knees and teeps up the middle. And Egawa didn't really have a consistent counter for that. So I'd like to see him do a little bit more offensive work at range when he's not able to back guys up. And it'll help, if he can do that, it'll likely help him get guys to the cage as well. And he needs an answer to better address those linear strikes like you mentioned. Our next fight was Koya Urabe versus Yuto Shinohara. I'm not super familiar with Shinohara, but Koya Urabe has been a top fighter for quite a while. So what did you think of this one, Shiram?
First of all, I'm glad you pronounced it before I did, but I enjoyed I don't know why this was an extra round, because it seemed like a very clear Urabe decision at the end. But I really enjoyed watching it. Urabe is, from what I saw, he was a quite dimensional southpaw. He did some cool stuff with the southpaw double attack to the body, but he's also a very committed southpaw jabber, and he did some cool stuff with drawing out Shinohara's counters and jabbing him like multiple times. The first knockdown was he's like set a rhythm with the southpaw jab in the first round, and he kind of hooked around it to land the left hand at the beginning of the second, which was pretty cool. Urabe straight up butchered his body near the end of the fight. He lots of straights to the body and like long hooks sometimes paired with the body kick. So I mean, it was kind of a beatdown by the end, and then the extra round, like I think both guys kind of knew it was completely useless. So Urabe just, he didn't really like destroy him in that round. He just kind of jabbed him and sat back because he'd already done all the damage. I'm not really familiar with the scoring criteria in K1. I figure it's like Muay Thai where it doesn't make much sense to people who don't watch it based on this. But it was a fun fight. I mean, it was a fun beatdown, I think. Watching this kind of body work is always fun. I guess that's the theme of the episode, and Urabe's pretty good at it.
Yeah, K1 loves their extra rounds. If you want to see perhaps the most ridiculous example of that, watch the first Buakaw versus Masato fight. Buakaw just kicks the entire shit out of him, just drubs him for the whole fight, absolutely demolishes him. He basically can't stand at the end of it. They have to like give him smelling salts, slap him in the face a couple times, inject him with meth, and then send him out for the extra round to get the shit beaten out of him even more. Yeah, that's a K1 thing. But yeah, it was a cool fight. Like I said, not too familiar with Shinohara, and he didn't look that great here, but he did land a couple good shots. Urabe mostly worked with the southpaw double attack, landed the 1-2s and his big body kick. He would repeatedly use those 1-2 combinations and 3-2s with kind of an off rhythm straight. He would collapse into the rear straight, so it came really quick on like a half beat. So instead of coming like 1-2, his straight and then his jab and then straight would come like 1-2, super fast. So as soon as Shinohara was reacting to the jab, he'd immediately get pelted with the straight. He dropped him with that in round 2. He was also using a really nice southpaw jab that I liked a lot. He was keeping a thudding jab in Shinohara's face to keep him in place at range and keep him occupied for his bigger power punches. Shinohara dropped Urabe in round 3 by slipping inside one of those jabs and throwing a right hook, though it looked like a bit of a slip to me. Not sure if that was really a knockdown. And then the rest of the round, Koya just kicked the entire shit out of him, just brutalized his body with big body kicks and left body hooks. I don't know why the extra round happened, and Urabe just kind of controlled him, just picked him apart with jabs and kicks. Instead of like throwing those big committed jabs like he was before, he started doing lighter trip hammer jabs, just throwing them directly out of his guard and messing up Shinohara's rhythm with that. So yeah, that was a fun fight. Not sure why the extra round happened, but it was a cool beatdown. Fun trivia fact, since I know you're not too familiar with him. Koya Urabe has a brother, Hirotaka Urabe. They're in the same division and they're both kickboxers, and they fought each other twice. So whenever
That's cool.
whenever you want like MMA fighters to fight and people are like, oh, but they're in the same camp, fuck you. These guys are brothers and they beat the shit out of each other. Hirotaka knocked him out with a knee in their last fight.
Are they still friends? Like Thanksgiving dinner's gotta suck.
Yeah, I can't imagine that. Like, their mom was there too, watching the fight. I think.
Oh no.
Imagine that, like seeing your son just beat
Winner.
the shit out of each other.
Loser gets written out of the will.
Oh god. Then finally, the last fight I want to talk about here is Taiyo Asahisa against Hiroki. Taiyo Asahisa is not, I was going to say it was a really interesting prospect, one of the most interesting in kickboxing, but he's not really a prospect anymore. He's already beaten some elite fighters. And he has a really cool kind of karate style. He's very Kyokushin, but he weaves it with boxing. He weaves it together with boxing really well. He does like the typical Kyokushin chambered kicks on the outside, the stepping knees and everything. And then when guys try to fight him on the inside, he's like shifting, taking angles, moving his head, bobbing and weaving and everything. It's fun to watch. So what did you think of Asahisa here?
I don't know, but it was a very, very aggressive fight from both. I think Hiroki dropped him with like a step-in knee in the first round. That was actually a pretty cool one. I think he dropped him into another one like a few seconds later. So Hiroki didn't look like bad, even though I didn't know anything about him, and he was kind of the fodder in this one. I feel like that's what only the first name means. It's like the opposite of how Madonna is Madonna. It's like if you only have one name, then you're kind of interchangeable. But
It's a
Tayo,
Japanese thing. All their people have one name: Rina, Kid, etc.
And Kid had a last name.
Yeah, but nobody said it. It was just Kid.
That's
how, like, when you see their names stylized, they put them as like Rina, Takeru, Kid, rather than Takeru Sagawa.
Yeah, that makes sense. But yeah, Tayo, I mean, both guys there were a lot of points where both guys just kind of swung in the pocket, and like Asahisa kind of overwhelmed him later in the fight. And then the ending of the fight where he threw a head kick out of the pocket, which was very, very weird. But it was fun to watch. Hiroki kind of just died with his eyes open. So not a ton. It was a pretty short, very, very action-packed fight. Didn't take as much away from it as I did from Urabe and Tsubakihara. About as much as I did from Yamazaki and Po, because both were just very, very nasty knockouts. But, I mean, Asahisa looks fun. The karate style is often very frustrating, but he does it pretty well since he can actually exist in the pocket.
Yeah, most of Asahisa's fights are like that. Super aggressive and fun. He was out kicking Hiroki early, and then, like you said, Hiroki dropped him midway through the first round with that flying knee. And he swarmed Asahisa with punches to try to put him away. But Asahisa did a pretty good job keeping himself safe with his head movement and positioning in the pocket, although Hiroki kept threatening knees to dissuade him from slipping. Once Asahisa got his bearings back, he did a lot of good work in the pocket himself early. He rocked Hiroki with a nice little split step straight, and then he I'm not sure how to explain this without like showing, but he had his weight kind of distributed evenly. Then he took like a little hop and pushed off his back foot to enter with the rear straight really quickly. And then as Hiroki was trying to react to that, just slipped a quick little lead hand punch inside that and rocked him with that. And then he finished him brutally in the second round. He landed a head kick as Hiroki threw like a spinning back fist and then swarmed him with punches for an 8 count. After Hiroki got back up, Asahisa beat him up a bit more and then finished him with a head kick from inside. That's a really Kyokushin style thing. If you watch Kyokushin fights, they always fight really squared up because there's no punches to the head. So all their attacks are body punches or kicks. So they fight really square, really close range, and they get really good at throwing kicks from almost chest to chest. If you watch guys like Masaki Nori, Francisco Fio, Andy Hug, etc., they can bring those kicks up from really tight and close. So Asahisa, they were inside, and they were like glove to glove with a high guard. Asahisa pushed off, snuck his rear leg far back with a little hopping pivot that you see guys use to kick off the back foot, and hit a really tight right hook to head kick combination. The chambered kicking you see from Kyokushin guys lets them do that well too. If you have to like pop your hip through on a kick and like throw a full kick like you see a lot in Muay Thai, it's harder to get those up from close range. But with a chambered kick, you can kind of bring your knee almost up to your chest and then snap that leg out, and it allows you to get really tight kicks off from close quarters. I love Asahisa's style. He has the cool karate kicking on the outside. He has a really interesting front kick. He uses the front kick. It's super versatile. He'll use it to keep range and keep guys on the outside, but he also uses it almost as like a throwaway jab. He'll like kind of buzz it. He'll use like a buzzing front kick where he throws it non-committally and step in off of it. But he'll also use it to draw counters. Like he'll throw a front kick that lands just a little bit short, expecting a guy to counter it. And then as soon as they throw back, he'll like shift forward off of it and land a counter punch. He'll like draw it up like he's about to front kick too, and then snap it off into head kicks. Those chambered kicks again. He can manipulate the path of that kick, make guys think he's gonna throw a front kick and kick the head, or transition to something else. And he does a lot of the feints that you see from Thais a lot with their teeps too, where he'll draw the leg up, make the guy think he's about to front kick, and then shift forward with punching combinations. Super fun to watch, and he's really young. I'm really excited for his future. I was going to talk about Muay Thai here too, but it's already like an hour, so I'll just give a quick little thing on Sangmanee and Tawanchai. Sangmanee, so I don't even know what Sangmanee is now. He's like Cafe Muay Thai or something. Fought Tawanchai, PK Sayanchai on this Saturday, so yesterday. They were 1-1 going into this fight. like I mentioned earlier, Tawanchai won the first fight by kicking him up on the outside, countering Sangmanee's kicks, and finishing him with he knocked him down with a head kick and then finished him off with a teep to the face. And Sangmanee won the second fight. The third fight was pretty back and forth at the beginning, but Tawanchai increasingly took over as the fight went on. Sangmanee opened up Tawanchai with an elbow in the second round, but didn't get too much else done. He was trying to crowd Tawanchai and hurt him into his round kicks and punches like he did in the second fight, but Tawanchai was threatening really strong counter punches to dissuade him. Tawanchai dropped him in, I think, the first or second round as well with one of those counter punches. So Sangmanee wasn't able to pressure as comfortably as he did in their second fight because he was having to deal with those stronger counter punches. Tawanchai's boxing looked improved, which is really encouraging for an eventual transition to kickboxing. His boxing defense looked good too. He wouldn't let Sangmanee establish his rear hand. His distance control was really good. He was preventing Sangmanee from getting off his kicks by keeping him out of kicking range. Whenever Sangmanee tried to step in, he would intercept him with a lead leg kick. He used those little sweeping inside leg kicks you see a lot from Thais to knock Sangmanee off his balance and prevent him from getting off any kicks. He was putting together some nice kicking combinations too, double tapping the lead leg, inside leg kick, and body kick. So he'd throw the inside leg kick and then switch right into a body kick as Sangmanee came forward and tried to counter. And then once Tawanchai established his hard counter punches, he would feint them to back Sangmanee off and land kicks or knees. By the fourth round, Tawanchai was pretty much controlling him. He was interrupting his entries with counters or breaking his balance with that little inside leg kick, and Sangmanee couldn't really get much done. It was a great performance from Tawanchai. It was a really neat cap to their series as well, because you can see a lot of adjustments they made from fight to fight, which I talked about a little bit earlier with Sangmanee punching off his kicks to throw off Tawanchai's kick catching, and then Tawanchai kind of responded to that by just avoiding letting Sangmanee get in position to kick at all with those little inside leg kicks to break his balance, the counter punches, and feinting him off. Sangmanee, at this point, I'm not sure why he's still fighting at 142. I know he said he wants to, his best weight is like 130, 137-ish, 138, and he doesn't want to fight so high, but it looks like the promoters are kind of making him fight up. Tawanchai was quite a bit bigger than him, and Tawanchai cut to that weight, whereas Sangmanee had to gain a couple pounds. So I'd really like to see Sangmanee fight someone a little bit closer to his own size. But either way, it was a great fight, well worth watching. And looks like we're about out of time, so I won't talk about too much more Muay Thai. I'll save that for the next edition of the podcast. But definitely check out the Sangmanee and Tawanchai fight. Suram, before we wrap this up, do you have anything to promote or shout out? Anything you're working on right now?
So check out the AAA Sarnavskiy article where I kind of just wrote down all the stuff that I said here, but it has videos which kind of illustrate that better. What I'm working on, the Whitaker Cannonier fight is coming out soon, or not coming, it's happening soon, and I'm working on something for that, but it's still in very early stages. Other than that, not really. How about you, Ryan?
I'm working on a Nathan Corbett video right now. Stay tuned for that. It's going to be a lot of fun. Otherwise, I haven't had too much time to write lately. Most of my stuff has been video work. But keep your eyes peeled for that Nathan Corbett video. And I'm going to try to get on a more consistent schedule for recording. So I'll be recapping the week's action of Muay Thai from now on. I'll release it on a bi-weekly schedule, so every 2 weeks like I was before. And hopefully I won't get busy and have to take like 3 months off again. Anyways, thanks for joining us. Thanks for coming on, Suram. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for letting me just completely bullshit about K1.
We'll mold you into a kickboxing fan in no time. Soon I'll have you on here talking, saying names like Sangmanee and Tawanchai.
I can say those two names and none of the other ones, if that helps.
They hands and feet and balls and knees. This is an art of boxing you would all love to learn. Ooh-ah. small, no need to fear. Strike right and left with your own bows and with your knees. Now suck them hard with your soul and then kick out and on.